Welcome back to the Ready State. We're looking at Kelly's Instagram again. Something that triggered in my brain when I saw this incredible jump by this sophomore that showed up in one of my feeds. And what we're seeing is an incredible takeoff on this athlete showing pretty explosive hops. Now don't look at mechanics coming in. I just want you to see that this athlete's jumping very high. Okay. One of the things that we're trying to get across, or the one of the things that we think about, and is certainly an underpinning of the way we train and try to integrate ideas of rehab and degrees of performance, and especially as we think about sports preparation training, which is, hey, why am I training a certain way to have a certain outcome? One of those things is we believe that practice makes permanent. And more importantly, we're seeing the gym is not just physiologic adaptation. Muscles get stronger, kids get better conditioned, we see third wave adaptations in mitochondria, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, what we're thinking is, hey, this is as much about those things as it is about coordination and practice. And so a lot of times what we're thinking is, hey, these movements are behaviors that we're trying to reinforce. And one of the things here that you're seeing is not the case, but I want to show you that we have an athlete who's now with a flexed foot in the air, and then they're trying to do this so that they can delay the amount of contact time on the force plate. So what we have is, with this rigid foot in the air, we have the athlete, again, trying to get as much hang time, and with that foot down, the hang time is going to be shorter. So what we see is true time to drop. Now, if this athlete was super smart, he would pick his knees up, and as he fell and land in a deep squat, and that would make this even longer, right? He's probably been coached out of that. But what's interesting about this is notice how this person lands and what ends up happening to their ability to generate force and move in this other position. So with this flexed rigid foot, which we see so much in the development of skill around jumping, especially when we are working on jump roping, we see that our athletes are not availing themselves of being able to point the toe and being able to drop from a full toe point where we have now the full access of the heel into being able to decelerate from this sort of high jumping position. One of the reasons that we coach when an athlete is in the air, we want butt squeeze and toes pointed, is that it's cueing this mass extension so that our athletes can actually absorb force and land. So not getting into the weeds on a triple extension conversation, but when we're in the air, we know we're in a good position because we can control the lumbar with a butt squeeze, and toes pointed shortens, basically allows us to tap into this global extension position. Toes flexed fires up the quads and actually shortens the position, fires up the hip flexors, puts the lumbar into sometimes less effective positions to generate force and to land. More importantly though, when we see that this athlete is landing with this rigid foot, this is all too common when we watch kids play volleyball and are coming down from the net. And when all of a sudden they land and they don't have access, or they haven't been trained to point their toes when they're in the air, in kipping, in jump roping, et cetera, we oftentimes see is that this rigid foot leads to a lot of transmission of force through the chain, through the ankle, et cetera, et cetera. So again, the idea here is that this athlete has been cued into doing the right thing to get the maximum hop, but the implication is how he then absorbs this force was a cue for me of why we end up teaching point the toes, squeeze the butt. That toe pointed position ends up mapping very, very well with the work we do with our young ballet dancers locally, and being able to absorb that, using that ankle to absorb force through the entire kinetic chain instead of kicking out one of the crucial aspects. So even when we're jump roping, we don't always want our athletes to be as rigid as possible. We want our athletes to be able to point their toes so that they can be jump roping and practicing absorbing force, not necessarily always being stiff. We're going to get plenty of stiffness driving changes in things like plyometrics and sprinting also, but when we're in the air, that toe point can do a long ways of beginning to use the calf to absorb force, return force, and transmit that up, instead of having this be a dead end, which is exactly what this is. Watch the shocks go up through the system, athlete falls over backwards, we don't have a controlled landing. This is how I think. Are we training for behavior change, or are we training to just accomplish a task? This is the question.